Still, the microphone hissed as he grinned and announced me an unemployed loser, like it was part of the celebration. As I smoothed the brown paper on my small gift, I kept my face steady, letting the hiss swallow my first surge of shock. While the speaker crackled under his laugh, I watched my daughter's smile fracture, and I refused to give him a scene. The same hiss shifted the air when a man by the bar went stone still, eyes locked on me like he'd just seen a ghost. That's when I realized he wasn't just a guest, he was Ethan's boss, and he knew exactly who I used to be. Still, the microphone hissed as I made my decision. I wouldn't raise my voice tonight because his downfall would do it for me. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Gus arrived at the waterfront venue early, slipping through the entrance with little fanfare. His simple suit, worn like an old friend, fit well but didn't draw attention. In his hand, he carried a small, unremarkable gift wrapped in brown paper, a token for Maya, something personal but understated. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here for her. The venue was a world apart from Gus's life, a space of elegance and polished surfaces. People mingled, their laughter echoing through the high ceilings. Gus stood off to the side, watching the crowd. His daughter, Maya, was about to marry Ethan Price, a man Gus didn't trust. Everything about him screamed charm and ambition, but Gus had learned to recognize the difference between surface polish and real substance. Ethan, of course, was playing the room like a politician. His smile was wide, practiced, and his laugh boomed, drawing people in. The attention he soaked up seemed endless, and Gus couldn't help but feel a twinge of discomfort, as though Ethan was more a performance than a person. Still, Gus kept his distance, his eyes focused on Maya, knowing she believed in this moment. And then it came the toast. Ethan stood tall, glass raised, his voice commanding the attention of the entire room. With all due respect, he began smoothly, I'd like to introduce Maya's father, Gus Kendall. A great man, really. An unemployed loser who taught her what not to marry. The words rang out, a brutal slap to the room. A few awkward chuckles echoed through the crowd. Maya's face froze, her smile turning brittle. She looked torn, caught between shame and disbelief. Gus stood still, the sting of the words settling deep, but he didn't flinch. He simply nodded, acknowledging the insult with the same neutrality as if Ethan had just announced the weather. He wasn't going to make a scene, not yet. His gaze never wavered from Maya, silently telling her he wasn't angry. Not at her, just disappointed. As the room settled, the atmosphere thickened. Gus's attention shifted. Across the room, by the bar, stood an older man watching him closely, Victor Hargrove. Gus recognized him immediately. A senior executive from one of the major development firms tied to union contracts. There was something in Victor's gaze, something sharp, as if he saw beyond the veneer of the room. Victor's expression shifted ever so slightly, his mouth tightened, his eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. And then, the subtle shift in the room became undeniable. The laughter didn't stop, but it faltered. People returned to their drinks and small talk, but Gus could feel the change. It wasn't the crowd that mattered, it was Victor, and the quiet recognition that passed between them, unspoken but heavy. Gus's mind raced, piecing it together. Ethan's words weren't just a personal insult, they were a power move, an attempt to diminish Gus before the crowd, to make him small. But Victor, someone with weight in the industry, knew better. Gus could sense it. Victor knew who he was, what he had done in the past. And in that moment, the dynamics of the room shifted. The silence between them wasn't just recognition, it was a warning. Maya didn't smile again, not fully. Her face, once bright with excitement, now held something darker: guilt, confusion, maybe regret. Gus didn't move, didn't offer words of reassurance. He only stood there, his grip tightening around the small gift, the weight of what was happening pressing down on him. Ethan continued to work the crowd, oblivious to the subtle shift in the room. Gus knew this was only the beginning, that the evening was far from over. What Ethan had started with his words wasn't just a public insult, it was the first move in something much bigger. And Gus was already calculating how to respond. The rest of the night stretched ahead, thick with uncertainty, and Gus could feel the tension building. But for now, he said nothing, just watched and waited. The applause rang through the air, but it felt distant, as if it was coming from somewhere far away. Maya stood frozen, her smile stiff as she tried to mask the sting of what had just happened. The room buzzed with light chatter, but the weight of Ethan's words hung like a shadow. Gus remained still, his gaze never wavering, watching Maya, watching the crowd. He knew this moment wasn't about celebration, it was about power. Ethan had made that clear, and Gus wasn't about to let it go unnoticed. Maya found her way to him, stepping toward him with careful steps, her eyes already filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, her voice low. The words rushed, like she couldn't get them out fast enough. "I didn't mean for this to happen." She was trying to make it right, trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed by an apology. Her eyes flickered toward the crowd as if she were afraid of drawing attention to herself. But Gus didn't move, didn't say a word for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm, but with a weight that cut deeper than anger. "Don't apologize for someone else's cruelty, Maya." His words were measured, slow, and his eyes didn't leave her face. He wasn't angry, not in the way Diane would be, but the realization hit him. This wasn't the first time Ethan had shown this side of himself. He wasn't just trying to belittle Gus. He was trying to shape Maya, to control her perception of what she deserved. Maya's lips trembled, the tears threatening, but she blinked them away quickly, not wanting to break in front of everyone. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Just then, Diane arrived, her face flushed with the heat of fury. She didn't even need to ask what happened. The look on Gus's face said everything. "What the hell did he say?" Diane's voice rose, cutting through the chatter in the room. There was no hiding the anger behind her words, no disguising the protective instinct that flared to life. Maya looked like she was going to crumble, but Gus stepped forward, his hand gently resting on Diane's arm. "Don't, Diane," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We need to see how far Ethan's willing to take it." Diane stared at him, disbelief written all over her face. She opened her mouth to protest, but Gus's steady gaze silenced her. There was no time for confrontation. Not yet. Gus wasn't about to give Ethan the satisfaction of a public blow-up. This wasn't just about a wedding toast. It was about something bigger. Victor Hargrove appeared out of the crowd, his eyes meeting Gus's across the room. Gus had seen him before, an older man, a senior executive in the development firm tied to Ethan's world. They had crossed paths in the past, but this time, there was something different in the way Victor approached him. He said nothing for a moment, studying Gus closely, as if weighing something unspoken. "We need to talk soon," Victor said quietly, his voice low and direct. He didn't wait for a response, just turned and vanished back into the crowd, leaving Gus with even more questions. The way Victor had said it, there was no mistaking the urgency in his tone. Something was happening behind the scenes, and Gus could feel it closing in. Meanwhile, Ethan stood in the middle of the room, basking in the attention, his posture oozing self-satisfaction. He was surrounded by a group of friends, his voice loud as he boasted about how he kept Maya grounded. The words were casual, almost too casual, but the meaning behind them was clear. Ethan was positioning himself as the one who kept everything in check, even if it meant humiliating Gus in front of everyone. Gus didn't react. He just watched. His gaze didn't leave Ethan, but there was no anger in it, just calculation. Ethan had made a move. Now Gus would see how far he'd go before he hit a wall. The ceremony began, and Gus remained seated, his hands folded in his lap. His mind wasn't on the vows being exchanged, it was on the long game. He wasn't just watching a wedding. He was sizing up the man who thought he could control his daughter's future. Gus wasn't about to let Ethan win this without a fight. But for now, all he could do was wait, watch. And when the time came, he would strike. The ceremony continued, but Gus knew it was only the beginning. Ethan's play had been bold, but there was no way he would get away with it. Not while Gus was still standing. The house felt unusually still as Gus walked through the door. The wedding was over, and the heavy, unsettled silence that followed made the world feel distant, as though he were already removed from everything. Maya had gone with Ethan, and Diane had retreated into the kitchen, her anger still simmering. Gus needed a moment alone to process everything. His mind replayed the events, the sharp sting of Ethan's toast, and Victor's gaze, those quiet signals, like whispers in the dark, suggesting a world Gus was only now beginning to understand. He moved to the study, his steps slow and deliberate, and pulled out an old binder. It was thick, worn, and filled with years of his past work. things that once defined him. He flicked through the pages, contracts, compliance records, old project reports. This was his life before retirement, before the accident that had ended his days in the field. The world thought he was unemployed. That word didn't capture it, not by a long shot. He'd been medically retired after his injury, but his real work had continued. As trustee on a construction benefits fund, he made decisions about contractor compliance. People's livelihoods depended on his judgment. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was important, and it meant something. It gave him influence, even if no one seemed to remember that anymore. Victor's face appeared in his thoughts again, the way he'd looked at Gus across the room at the wedding. Gus knew the man. Victor's company had projects tied to union cooperation, and that meant Gus had a seat at the table. It wasn't just small-time work. This was big. Gus wasn't a washed-up nobody. He was still a player in the game, even if no one, especially Ethan, seemed to know it. Diane's voice broke through his thoughts. "You should expose him, Gus. Call him out." She'd been furious after the wedding, the raw edge of her anger cutting through the room. Gus understood it. He was angry too. But he didn't want to fight Ethan in public. Not yet. Public drama would only give Ethan more control, more ammunition to turn the narrative against him. Against Maya. "No," Gus had said earlier, his voice calm but firm. "This would hurt Maya more than anyone. We need to see how far Ethan will take it." Diane hadn't liked it, but she respected his decision. For now, the fight wasn't public. It wasn't about the wedding or the toast. It was about something deeper, something far more complicated. As Gus sat there, the weight of it all pressed on him. His phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. It was Maya. Her text was simple, but it hit him like a punch to the gut. "Ethan says you're jealous." The words were like a splinter under his skin. Jealous? Gus could hear Ethan's voice in his mind, smooth, insidious. It wasn't just an insult. It was a tactic. He was isolating Maya, poisoning her mind against him. Ethan wasn't just trying to belittle Gus. He was trying to control how Maya saw her father. And in this, he was succeeding. The words stung more than they should have. It wasn't about ego. It was about the way Ethan was manipulating her, trying to make Maya believe that Gus wasn't supportive, that he didn't have her best interests at heart. Gus's fingers tightened around the phone. He wasn't angry at Maya. He knew she was caught in the middle, confused, vulnerable. But Ethan's plan was clear. Isolate Maya. Make her doubt the people who cared about her, especially her father. The more Ethan fed her these lies, the further she would drift from the truth. With a heavy sigh, Gus dialed a number. It was familiar, routine even. Attorney Lila Moreno. She had been his lawyer for years, a woman who knew the ins and outs of contracts, trust disputes, and the kind of messy situations that Gus found himself in now. He trusted her, and he knew she'd be the one to help him navigate this carefully. Lila answered after 2 rings. "Gus," she said, her voice calm. No judgment, just readiness. "What's going on?" "I need a meeting," Gus said, his voice steady. "No fireworks, just options." A brief pause. "Got it. I'll make time." Gus hung up, letting the silence settle around him again. The phone vibrated in his hand. Another message from Maya. He didn't check it. The weight of what was ahead felt like a heavy, unshakable truth. There were options, yes, but first, he had to give Maya the space to see through the lies. The night stretched on, but Gus was clear-headed now. He wasn't just an old man watching from the sidelines. He was part of this story, and he would not let Ethan's games tear apart his family. The quiet truth was just the beginning, and soon he would act. Gus walked into the sleek downtown office with a feeling he couldn't quite place something tight in his chest, a gut instinct telling him that this meeting wasn't as innocent as Victor's invitation suggested. "Congratulations on the wedding," Victor had said a little too smoothly, as though the words were rehearsed. But Gus knew better than to take things at face value. Victor Hargrove wasn't the type to just stop by for pleasantries. Victor's office was pristine, with glass walls and a view that could make anyone feel small. Gus stood in the doorway, taking in the polished modernity, his old work boots out of place on the polished marble floor. Victor stood behind his desk, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you," Gus said, not bothering with formalities. He wasn't here for small talk. Victor motioned to the chair across from him. "Please sit," he insisted. And Gus took the seat, eyes narrowing. There was something about Victor's calm that didn't match the tension in Gus's gut. "I wanted to congratulate you on your daughter's wedding," Victor continued, his tone light. "But there's something else I've been meaning to talk to you about." Gus stayed silent, waiting for Victor to get to the point. Victor leaned forward, the smile fading just slightly. "I recognize you, Gus. You're the man who saved that project, aren't you? The one who refused to rubber stamp safety compliance when everyone else was looking the other way." The mention of that old project hit Gus like a jolt. He hadn't thought about it in years, but the memory came flooding back, the tension, the pressure to overlook the safety violations for the sake of speed and money. Gus had stood firm, knowing the consequences would be dire if the corners were cut. And in the end, he'd saved the workers, saved the company's reputation, and had earned a quiet respect from those who mattered. "That's right," Gus said, his voice calm, betraying none of the old anger that resurfaced with the memory. "I wasn't about to let them get away with it." Victor's lips twitched, like he was both impressed and measuring Gus at the same time. "I respect that. But I wonder, does Ethan know who you really are?" He leaned back, his eyes studying Gus carefully, waiting for the answer. Gus paused, his gaze steady. "Ethan only knows what makes him feel big," he said flatly. "He's not interested in the truth." Victor nodded, the slightest flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "I thought as much," he muttered under his breath. Then his tone shifted, more direct. "You see, Ethan's been fast-tracked in this company. Despite complaints about his arrogance, he's getting all the breaks." Gus's mind whirred. Ethan's rise had been too fast, too convenient. The pieces were starting to fall into place. This wasn't just about Gus's past. It was about Ethan's ambition, the kind that disregarded everyone in its path. And now, Victor was making it clear. Ethan's arrogance wasn't something that could be overlooked. "Victor," Gus said, his voice steady but with an edge, "you're not here to congratulate anyone. You're here to figure out where I stand." Victor's gaze flicked over to him. "Exactly," he admitted with a thin smile. "I need to know if you're still a problem. You've got a reputation, Gus. And with Ethan's ambitions, well, it's important for me to know how much power you still have." Gus felt the weight of that statement sink in. Victor wasn't here for pleasantries. He was testing Gus, measuring his potential for risk. The conversation wasn't about the wedding at all. It was about control, about leverage, about the influence Gus still held, even after all these years. As Gus prepared to leave, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked it quickly. Lila's name flashed on the screen. He hadn't spoken to her in a few days, but her message was simple. "If Ethan is involved in any fraud, the fallout could hit you too. We need to discuss this." Victor was still talking, but Gus's mind was already racing. If Ethan had been involved in any shady business, the fallout could damage more than just Gus's reputation. It could bring everything crashing down. "Thanks for the chat, Victor," Gus said abruptly, standing up. "I'll be in touch." Victor's gaze followed him as he left, that calculating look still in his eyes. Gus felt the weight of what had just transpired. Ethan's move at the wedding, it wasn't just an insult. It was the beginning of something much bigger. A strategic move designed to disrupt everything Gus had built, everything he was. And now, he knew, Ethan wasn't just fighting for status. He was trying to rewrite the rules of the game. Gus stepped out of the office, the door closing behind him with a soft click. He had work to do. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. The silence in Gus's office was heavy as he opened the email from Lila. He hadn't expected to hear from her today, but the subject line was clear. Important, confidential. His eyes skimmed the contents quickly, landing on the forwarded thread. The first name that jumped out was Ethan's. Gus's heart sank. He wasn't ready for what he was about to read. Ethan's words were damning. "We need to handle union issues, and Gus Kindle's connections are the key. Maya's marriage to me will ensure his compliance." The statement hit Gus like a punch. Ethan had planned to leverage Maya's marriage as a tool to control Gus. It wasn't just about humiliating him at the wedding, it was part of a calculated strategy to get him to bend to Ethan's will. Gus read it again, disbelief clouding his mind. Ethan was using Maya. His daughter was a pawn in a game he hadn't even realized had started. The toast, the public insult, it wasn't random. It was a warning. Ethan was claiming territory, trying to make Gus feel small, reminding him that his influence could be easily stripped away. Lila's follow-up was succinct and chilling. "This email confirms what we suspected. Ethan is manipulating his relationship with Maya to pressure you. This is coercion, Gus. It's a conflict of interest and could lead to legal repercussions." The words hit Gus like a freight train. He hadn't just been insulted, he'd been targeted. And Maya, unknowingly, was at the center of it. His phone buzzed, interrupting the storm of thoughts swirling in his head. It was Maya. His pulse quickened as he answered, already knowing what was coming. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, her voice tight, almost defensive. "Ethan says you're overreacting about the wedding toast. He says Victor misheard it and that you're just jealous of our relationship." Gus's heart tightened. He had feared this. Ethan was already rewriting the story, shifting the blame onto him. The accusation wasn't just a defense of Ethan, it was part of the strategy to alienate Gus, to make him seem petty and jealous. It was textbook manipulation, and Gus wasn't about to let Maya get caught in it. He paused, taking a deep breath. He needed to stay calm to give her the space to see the truth. "Did he ever apologize?" he asked, his voice steady, almost too calm. The question hung in the air like a weight, waiting for a response. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. He could hear Maya breathing, her hesitation loud in the silence. I don't know," she said quietly, as if searching for the right words, but the uncertainty in her voice was clear. She didn't want to admit what Ethan had done. She didn't want to see her fiancé for what he really was. Gus closed his eyes, feeling the sting of betrayal, but also the pull of determination. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about Maya. Ethan had crossed a line, and Gus couldn't stand by and let his daughter fall deeper into this web. He could feel the divide between them growing, the space widening with each word, but he wasn't about to back down. "I'm not going to let this slide, Maya," Gus said, his voice firm. "Ethan's using you, and he's using me. I'm not going to let him manipulate you into thinking this is okay. You deserve better than this." Maya didn't respond right away. The silence on the line was deafening. Gus knew she was processing what he had just said, her mind torn between the man she loved and the man who had always protected her. It hurt to see her caught in the middle, but Gus knew what he had to do. The call ended without resolution, leaving Gus with a deep sense of unease. The lines had been drawn, and the battle was far from over. Ethan had shown his hand, but Gus would show his in turn carefully, deliberately. He sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders. There was no turning back now. Whatever happened next, Gus knew he had to protect Maya, even if it meant pushing her away in the process. The quiet truth was out, but now it was time to act. Gus sat in the quiet of his office, his fingers moving steadily over the keyboard as he updated his conflict of interest disclosures. He had no choice but to formally recuse himself from any dealings involving Victor's firm. The decision wasn't a difficult one to make, it was necessary. The lines had to be drawn clearly. He couldn't risk Ethan using their relationship to pressure him, especially when it came to decisions that would affect Maya's future. Signing the recusal form was one thing. Feeling the weight of it was another. The ink on the paper was more than just a formality. It was a statement. He had to protect Maya, even if it meant stepping back from something that had once mattered to him. There was no place for any semblance of conflict when his daughter's well-being was at stake. Gus paused for a moment, staring at the signed document. The silence of the office felt heavier than usual, as if the air itself was waiting for the inevitable ripple this decision would cause. And ripple it did. Word spread quickly through the office. Ethan, ever the one to keep his ear to the ground, had heard about Gus's recusal before the end of the day. He wasn't someone who liked losing control, and Gus knew it. The moment Ethan realized the leverage he'd counted on was slipping away, panic would set in. The smug confidence he displayed so publicly at the wedding would begin to crack. Gus didn't have to be there to imagine it. Ethan's world, so carefully constructed, was starting to crumble. Meanwhile, Diane was growing more concerned. She had learned from Maya that Ethan had pushed her to sign a prenup, one that was clearly written to benefit him in every way. Diane was furious. She knew this wasn't just about a legal formality. It was a tactic, a way to bind Maya to him financially, ensuring that she would be tied to Ethan in ways that went far beyond love. Diane didn't hold back. "This isn't just a prenup, Gus," she said, her voice rising. "This is a trap." Gus didn't react immediately. He had known it would come to this. The prenup wasn't just an unfair document. It was a clear sign of who Ethan truly was. But confronting Maya about it directly, not yet. He needed time to figure out his next move, to give her space to see the truth on her own. He called Lila, asking her to review the document quietly, without tipping Maya off just yet. Lila's response was quick and to the point. This is more than just bad terms. Ethan set up a financial trap, Gus. There are clauses that isolate Maya, limit her financial independence, and make it almost impossible for her to take legal action if things go south. Hearing that confirmed Gus's worst fears. Ethan wasn't just after Maya's heart, he was after control. The more Gus thought about it, the more disgusted he became. This was no longer just about him. It was about his daughter's future. But Gus couldn't afford to confront her with anger. Not yet. It had to be different. He arranged to meet Maya for lunch, private, calm. The conversation wasn't going to be a confrontation. It was going to be a carefully chosen moment to plant the seeds of doubt in her mind. He had to do this right, for her. As he sat at the table, he prepared himself for what he knew would be the hardest conversation of his life. Maya's face looked strained, like she was caught between the man she loved and the man who had always been her protector. When she sat down, Gus said, "Maya, I know this isn't easy, but love should never require you to shrink. You shouldn't have to make yourself smaller to fit into someone else's world." She shifted in her seat, looking at him with a mixture of confusion and hurt. He could see it in her eyes, the way she was trying to reconcile everything she had been told. But Gus had to say it. "This isn't just about a marriage, sweetheart. It's about who you are. You deserve a partnership where you're seen as an equal, where you don't have to sacrifice your independence." Maya opened her mouth to respond, but Gus held up a hand. "Please, just hear me out," he said. "I'm not trying to make decisions for you, but I can't stand by and watch you get trapped in something that isn't what you deserve." The words hung in the air between them, thick with the weight of what Gus was asking. Maya didn't speak right away, her face a mixture of emotions. He wasn't sure how she'd react, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was doing the right thing, even if it tore them apart. And as the conversation lingered, Gus could only wait, knowing that the next few days would determine everything. The small cafe was quiet, the soft clink of silverware and hushed conversations surrounding Gus as he waited for Maya. It felt like another world, far removed from the tension that had been building between them. When she entered, her eyes met his briefly, then dropped to the ground as she walked over. Gus rose to greet her, his heart heavy but his face calm. This lunch wasn't going to be easy. He had no illusions about that. "Maya," he said, pulling out the chair for her, trying to keep his voice gentle. "It's good to see you." She gave a small smile, but it was fleeting. The familiar warmth he'd once seen in her eyes had been replaced with something guarded, as if she was preparing herself for something she already knew was coming. They sat, the silence between them stretching uncomfortably. Gus chose not to dive right into the chaos. Instead, he began with something that might bridge the gap between them. "Remember when you were little?" Gus asked, his voice soft. "You used to love coming here for ice cream even in the cold. You'd argue with me about how it wasn't too cold, and I'd just let you have it anyway. That fire in you, no one could stop it." Maya's expression softened just a little, the hint of a smile on her lips. "Yeah, I remember. You'd always say I had ice cream in my veins." Gus's heart clenched slightly, the nostalgia pulling at him. He missed that version of Maya, the one who was so certain, so sure of herself. But that girl wasn't sitting across from him now. The woman before him was conflicted, caught between the life she was building with Ethan and the man who had always stood by her. He paused before asking, "Do you feel respected, Maya?" His voice was quiet but steady, his gaze never leaving hers. Her response came too quickly. "Of course, Dad. Ethan respects me." But it was rehearsed, the words falling too easily from her lips. Gus could see it in her eyes. She wasn't as sure as she was pretending to be. Gus didn't push it. Instead, he slid the prenup across the table, the paper landing with a soft rustle. Maya looked at it briefly but didn't reach for it. The space between them tightened. "I don't want to talk about this now," Maya said, her tone defensive. "It's just a formality." "This isn't just a formality, Maya," Gus said, his voice firm but still calm. "Look at the clauses. They protect him, not you. You're giving him control over everything. Your independence, your security. You need to see this for what it is." Maya's eyes flickered between Gus and the prenup, but she picked it up slowly. She read through it with an air of disbelief, her brows furrowing slightly. It's not that bad, Dad. Ethan's just under pressure. He jokes badly. You know how he is. Gus sat back, his gaze steady. Pressure doesn't excuse this, Maya. He's using it to manipulate you. He paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air. This isn't about protecting your relationship, it's about controlling you. She flinched at his words, but Gus wasn't done. What about the toast? He asked softly, his voice holding a quiet but undeniable power. When he humiliated me in front of everyone, how did that feel? Maya's face paled, and her gaze dropped to her lap. The silence stretched, her fingers gripping the edge of the table, her lips pressed tightly together. Finally, she spoke, her voice small. It made me feel small, she admitted, the words escaping her like a sigh. It was the first time she had said it aloud, and it felt like a crack in the wall she'd built. Gus's chest tightened, but he held his ground. Did he apologize? His voice was steady. Despite the tension he could feel creeping into his chest, Maya hesitated. The silence between them deepened. He promised it won't happen again, she said quickly, but the uncertainty in her voice was clear. She wasn't convinced by Ethan's promises, but she didn't know how to admit it. Gus leaned in slightly, his voice quieter now, but just as firm. Maya, if he can humiliate me in public, he can do worse in private. You deserve more than this. Maya looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to reconcile the father she had known with the man sitting across from her now. She didn't say anything at first. Her lips parted, but the words didn't come. The lunch ended in an uneasy silence. As they stood to leave, Gus could see the conflict inside her, the way she was torn between the man who had always been there for her and the man she was still trying to protect. She hadn't said what he needed to hear, but the conversation had opened something. How much it would change, he couldn't say, but he knew one thing for sure. The battle was only just beginning. Gus walked out of the cafe, the weight of the conversation settling heavily on his shoulders. Whatever came next, he was ready. The truth was out there now, and he wasn't backing down. Ethan had been watching Maya closely, and he could sense the shift. The cracks were starting to show, those small moments where she hesitated, where the conviction in her voice faltered. To Ethan, it was a threat. So he did what he always did. He turned on the charm. A weekend getaway, a surprise trip, anything to distract her, to pull her back into his world, away from whatever Gus was planting in her mind. The more Ethan pushed, the more Maya retreated, and that terrified him. But as much as Ethan tried to tighten his grip on her, Gus was preparing his own moves. Victor called again, his voice low with urgency. A compliance audit's coming, Gus. Ethan's nervous, Victor said, his words sharp with the weight of something unspoken. It's not just about reputation anymore. There's more at stake. Gus could hear the underlying anxiety in Victor's voice. Ethan's rise had been fast, too fast, and now the consequences were catching up. Gus had suspected Ethan had been cutting corners, trying to impress the wrong people, but hearing it from Victor made it real. It wasn't just about business, it was about safety, legality. If Ethan's actions were exposed, it could bring down more than just his career. Gus would be tied to it, even if he wasn't directly involved. Lila had been Gus's lifeline through these situations before. She knew how to handle the legalities, the mess of a situation like this. Gus called her immediately. Document everything, she told him, and stay away from private conversations with Ethan. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Gus knew she was right, but the weight of that advice was heavy. It wasn't just the fallout from the wedding anymore. There were bigger things at stake, things that could ruin them all if they weren't careful. Diane's call only added fuel to the fire. She had overheard Ethan talking with his friends, bragging about owning the Kendall family by Christmas. Gus's blood ran cold. Ethan had crossed a line. This wasn't just about Maya anymore. He wasn't just trying to humiliate Gus. He was trying to take everything. Gus didn't let the anger consume him. He stayed calm. Don't react, he said. We have to be smart. If Ethan wants to play this game, we'll play it on our terms. But the more Gus thought about it, the more clear it became. Ethan wasn't just after Maya's heart. This marriage was becoming a business deal, wrapped in a thin veil of romance. Love was the last thing on Ethan's mind. It was all about control, power. Gus couldn't let that happen. He called Victor again. We're handling this through official channels only, Gus told him, his voice firm. No more side meetings, no more backdoor conversations. This is business, and it's going to be dealt with that way. Gus had to protect Maya, even if it meant losing her trust in the process. He couldn't let Ethan win, not like this. The more he dug into Ethan's actions, the more he realized the depth of the manipulation. Ethan's rise, his carefully constructed image, had all been built on lies. Gus wasn't going to let him use Maya as his pawn anymore. As Gus sat back in his chair, the weight of his decisions pressed down on him. He knew what he had to do, but he also knew that it wouldn't be easy. The battle wasn't just about legalities or business. It was about saving Maya from a man who never truly loved her. He wasn't sure what the next few days would bring, but he was certain of one thing. He wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. Maya had always prided herself on her ability to trust Ethan, but today, a crack appeared in that trust. She was at work when she stumbled across the truth. Ethan wasn't being promoted as he'd promised. He was on probation. The realization hit like a punch to the stomach. He'd been lying to her, playing her for a fool. And worse, he had manipulated her into believing in a future that wasn't even real. The flood of anger that rose in her chest wasn't enough to keep her from confronting him. She found him later that day, calm as ever, smiling with his usual confidence. But the words that came out of his mouth were nothing but excuses. "It's just office politics," he said, shrugging off the truth like it was nothing. "Don't worry about it, Maya. People are just trying to bring me down. I'm sure Gus is behind it all." That was when the final thread snapped. Ethan, ever the manipulator, was already deflecting blame. He wasn't taking responsibility for anything. He wasn't even being honest about what was happening in his own life. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Are you blaming my father?" Maya asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. Ethan's smile never wavered, his confidence unwavering. "It's just office politics, Maya," he repeated, as if it was the simplest explanation in the world. "I'm sure Gus is just trying to get in the way." The accusation hit her like a slap. Gus, her father, was being dragged into Ethan's mess now. It was as if Ethan had no regard for how much damage he was causing. Maya walked out, heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. She had to go to her father. She had to know the truth. The lies, the manipulation, it was too much. When she arrived at Gus's house, she didn't hesitate. The door opened without a knock, and she walked in, face flushed with frustration and pain. Gus was sitting at the kitchen table, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the storm inside her. "Dad, we need to talk," Maya said, her voice tight, her hands trembling. "What's going on, sweetheart?" Gus asked, standing to greet her. He could already see the weight she was carrying, the confusion, the hurt. "Why didn't you tell me about Ethan?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Why didn't you warn me?" Gus's face softened, but there was no hesitation in his voice when he responded. "I didn't want to fill your mind with things you weren't ready to see," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "But I've seen enough, Maya. I've been watching Ethan. He's not the man he's shown you. I didn't want you to be hurt, but I can't ignore what he's doing anymore." Maya's breath caught in her throat, the realization settling in that everything she'd trusted about her future with Ethan might be a lie. She was angry, betrayed, and heartbroken, all at once. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "I wanted you to see it for yourself," Gus replied. "I've always been here for you, but you have to make the choice. I won't stand by and let him manipulate you." Maya's hands shook as she pulled out her phone, holding it out to Gus. "I found out he's lying to me about everything," she said, her voice quiet now. "He's not getting promoted. He's on probation." Gus didn't need to see the proof to know the truth. He nodded solemnly, taking a deep breath. "This isn't just about him failing at work, Maya. This is about control. He's using you, manipulating everything, and now it's spilling into your life." Maya stood still for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to accept it. But everything was pointing in the same direction, and she could no longer deny it. Before she could speak, the door opened behind her. Ethan stepped in, his smile too wide, too forced. He'd heard the conversation, and now he was here to set things straight. "Maya," he said, his voice smooth, "I think we need to talk. You should stay out of our marriage, Gus." Maya turned to face him, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected him to show up like this, with that smile, pretending everything was fine. But there was nothing fine about any of it. Nothing was, as it seemed. Gus stood firm, his posture steady, his eyes unflinching. Maya deserves the truth, Ethan. No more games. The air between them thickened, the tension palpable. Maya didn't know who to trust anymore. As the man she had loved stood before her, all she could feel was the weight of his lies. The silence stretched, leaving Maya to wonder if she could ever escape the web Ethan had woven, or if it was too late to reclaim her life. The storm was just beginning. The moment Gus picked up the phone, he knew something had shifted. Victor's voice, usually so composed, was tight with something unspoken. "Gus, I need to talk to you. There's been an issue with one of the projects Ethan's involved in." Gus's gut tightened. He had already suspected that Ethan's rise had come with questionable decisions, but now the truth was starting to surface. "What kind of issue?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Victor hesitated before answering, his tone darkening. "The audit. It uncovered falsified safety compliance on a project Ethan touched. It's bad, Gus. Really bad." The words hit Gus like a punch to the gut. Falsified safety compliance meant that corners had been cut, workers' lives compromised, all to make a project look clean on paper. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Gus could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, the magnitude of what this could mean for Ethan and for everyone involved. Victor continued, his voice heavy with the gravity of the situation. "If this gets out, there'll be fines, job losses, legal exposure. It's not something we can ignore. The whole project could be called into question." Gus's mind raced. Ethan had done this. He'd put his ambition ahead of everything else, and now it was all falling apart. It wasn't just about money or status, it was about lives. Victor's next words came out with a biting edge. "Ethan's already trying to pin it on a subordinate. He's sacrificing someone else to save himself." The realization hit Gus like a cold wave. Ethan hadn't just made a mistake, he'd chosen to destroy someone else's career to protect his own. It was a pattern Gus recognized all too well. The wedding toast, the public humiliation, the way Ethan had used Maya's connection to try to elevate himself. It wasn't just arrogance. It was a deep-rooted need to crush anyone weaker to maintain control. Gus clenched his jaw, his thoughts turning dark. "And if that's not enough, he'll throw Maya into the mix too," he muttered to himself. "He'll use her to pressure me if he has to." Victor didn't need to hear the words. He knew them all too well. "If he does," Victor said quietly, "it becomes extortion, and you won't have any recourse, Gus. You'll be forced to play his game or risk everything." The reality of what Ethan was capable of settled like a stone in Gus's chest. He wasn't just trying to control his career. He was trying to manipulate his entire life. And Maya, caught in the middle, was being used as a pawn in this dangerous game. Gus knew it was time to act and time to protect her, no matter what it cost him. Later that day, Gus sat in his office, the phone call with Victor still fresh in his mind. But before he could make a move, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Lila. "Maya's heard the truth. It's not from Ethan. It's from Victor's assistant. She knows now, Gus. She knows everything." Gus felt a wave of guilt and concern wash over him. Maya had heard the truth, but not from Ethan. That meant she wasn't hearing his side of things. She was hearing it from someone who wasn't trying to protect her, but wasn't hiding the truth either. Gus's heart dropped as he realized how deep the damage had already gone. Maya's trust in Ethan was fractured beyond repair. And then it hit him, her wedding day. Humiliation wasn't a slip-up. It wasn't a joke gone wrong. It was Ethan's character, laid bare. She had seen the truth in a way that could never be undone. Ethan had shown her exactly who he was, and it was someone willing to sacrifice anyone, even her, to maintain control. Gus's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Maya. The words were simple, but they cut through him like a knife. "I don't know who you are anymore." The sentence echoed in his mind, her voice ringing through his thoughts. Her words an accusation he wasn't sure how to answer. He stared at the screen, knowing that the weight of this moment wasn't just on his shoulders. The choice Maya had to make wasn't about him anymore. It was about her seeing Ethan for who he truly was. But how could she? How could she see the man she loved for what he really was when the truth had been buried in layers of lies? The silence in the room was deafening as Gus sat there, the distance between him and Maya widening with every passing second. He knew what needed to happen, But whether Maya was ready to face it, that was something else entirely. The storm was only just beginning, and Gus didn't know if they could weather it together. Maya moved into Diane's guest room that evening. A quiet decision made under the weight of mounting tension. She told Ethan it was just for space, a temporary measure to clear her head. But deep down, she knew it wasn't temporary. The truth had settled in her chest like a heavy stone. She needed distance, not just from him, but from the entire life they had built together. The silence of the room was both a comfort and a reminder of everything falling apart. Diane had been understanding, but even she could see the cracks in Maya's resolve. The distance between her and Ethan had grown unbearable. Ethan, for all his charm and confidence, was unraveling, and Maya couldn't pretend anymore that everything was fine. Ethan's texts came relentlessly, first apologies, then threats, then more apologies. "I'm sorry, Maya. Please don't leave me. I'll fix it." The words blurred together, his desperation bleeding through each message. But they weren't real. They weren't sincere. "If you leave me, you'll regret it," his next text read, followed by, "I can't live without you. Come back, please." The cycle never changed. Maya stared at her phone, her heart heavy with confusion and guilt. She didn't want to hurt him, but she couldn't keep pretending. Each apology felt like a repeat of the last, each threat more hollow than the one before. Ethan was suffocating her, even from a distance. Downstairs, Gus kept his distance, respecting Maya's need for space, but his heart ached as he watched her retreat into herself. Diane and Lila were taking the lead now, helping Maya find her way through the mess Ethan had left behind. Gus didn't want to intervene too soon. He knew she needed to make her own decisions, but it didn't make it any easier. Lila had started working on a plan: financial separation, communication boundaries, documentation. Gus wasn't sure how Maya would react when the time came to present it, but he knew it was the only way. Ethan had already manipulated too much. The plan was about giving Maya the tools to protect herself, even if she wasn't fully ready to see the truth yet. But as the days passed, Ethan began painting a new picture for everyone. He was telling their mutual friends that Maya was unstable, echoing the same tactics he had used with Gus. He was rewriting the story, trying to shift blame onto her as though she was the problem, the one overreacting. Gus felt a surge of anger. Ethan wasn't just trying to control Maya, he was trying to control the narrative. He wanted to twist the truth, to reshape reality in his image. And Gus couldn't let that happen. He wouldn't let Ethan use Maya's trust against her anymore. It hit Gus with a sudden clarity. Ethan's weapon wasn't just manipulation, it was control of the narrative. He had always known Ethan was good at making himself look like the victim. But now, it wasn't just a game to him, it was a full-scale war. And he wasn't going to win. Maya's phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. This time, she didn't even pick it up. She set it down on the bed, staring at it for a long moment before sighing deeply. "Why couldn't he just leave me alone?" she thought. "Why does he have to keep pulling me back in?" Gus could feel the tension building inside him. He couldn't afford to wait anymore. He had to act, but he had to be careful. Maya wasn't ready to face everything. Not yet. But the truth was creeping in little by little, and Gus knew that once it did, there would be no going back. The quiet in the guest room was broken by a soft knock at the door. Diane's voice floated in, gentle but firm. "Maya, dinner's ready whenever you're hungry. We're here for you." Maya looked at the door for a long moment, then at her phone again. She felt the distance between herself and Ethan, but also the distance between herself and everything she once thought was real. The room felt colder now, the weight of what had happened sinking in deeper. Ethan had pushed her to the edge. Gus was holding back, waiting for her to find her footing. But how long could she hold on? How long could anyone? And what would happen when the truth finally shattered everything? The knock on the door was sharp, unexpected, and insistent. Maya's heart dropped as she looked at Diane, who was already standing, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to ask who it was. Ethan had found them. Diane opened the door. Ethan stood there, his usual charm replaced by a hard edge. "Maya needs to come home," he said, his voice tight with a mix of anger and desperation. "This has gone far enough." Diane's stance was unwavering. "She's not going anywhere with you, Ethan. Not after everything." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You don't get to make that decision," he spat, then turned his gaze to Gus, who was standing behind Diane, observing the interaction with quiet intensity. "And you still trying to control everything, Gus? You've ruined everything." Gus remained calm, his voice steady. "You're not welcome here. Leave, or we'll call the police." Ethan's eyes flared with fury, but he didn't move. "You think you can intimidate me with this? I'll sue you for defamation if you even mention the audit. You don't know what I'm capable of," he warned, his voice cold and threatening. The words stung, but Gus stood firm. There was no theatrics in his response, just quiet authority. "If you don't leave, we'll call the police. That's your choice." Maya stood off to the side, the tension building inside her. Ethan's ability to manipulate, to shift blame, to make her feel small, was more apparent than ever. She had seen these patterns before, but now they felt suffocating. Ethan turned his attention to her, his eyes narrowing. "You're making a mistake, Maya," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm sorry for everything. Just come home. We'll figure this out. Please." Maya could feel the manipulation in every word, the pressure in his gaze. It felt like a tug on her heart, but she wasn't sure she could still believe him. The flood of messages, the lies about his promotion, the broken promises they had all piled up. And now, standing here, she couldn't ignore it anymore. Then the phone buzzed in Gus's pocket. Lila had sent an email responding to Ethan's threats. It was precise and professional. A legal warning. Any further attempts to pressure or intimidate Maya and her family will be documented and pursued legally. Consider this a formal notice. Ethan's face twitched as he read the message, the color draining from his cheeks. But he quickly masked it with another forced smile. "You think you can intimidate me with this? It's over, Maya. I'm done with this." Maya stood frozen, feeling the weight of his anger, but also the realization that everything he had ever said had been part of a game where he was the victim, the martyr, where everything was twisted to fit his narrative. She whispered, barely audible, "I think I married a stranger." The words left her lips before she could stop them, and they hit her like a wave. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by someone who only cared about control. Gus's hand rested gently on her shoulder, his presence a silent reassurance. He didn't say anything, but Maya could see it in his eyes. He understood. Ethan's voice cut through the silence, sharp and filled with contempt. "You'll regret this, Maya, I promise you." But Maya stood her ground. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Ethan, realizing he was losing his grip, stormed out of the house, his footsteps heavy with frustration. The door slammed behind him, and for a brief moment, everything was still. Maya's heart was racing, her breath shallow. The reality was sinking in. Ethan had lost his charm, lost his grip on the narrative, and now she was left facing the truth. The mask had slipped, and she wasn't sure if she could ever trust what was left beneath it. Maya's heart sank when the email from Reverend Simmons landed in her inbox. His message was short but significant. "Maya, I wanted to reach out about the toast at the wedding. Several people heard it, and I believe it's important for you to know that it wasn't just hurtful to you, but it was noted by others. If you need a statement, I'm happy to provide one." Maya stared at the screen, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had tried to tell herself that the humiliation was a private thing, something that Ethan had done in the heat of the moment, but the truth was now undeniable. Ethan's cruel words had been witnessed. The Reverend's offer of a statement made it clear that others had noticed the insult. It wasn't just her pain, it had been a spectacle for everyone in the room. The confirmation came a little later when Maya spoke with the venue's event coordinator. "Several guests complained about the toast," the coordinator explained, her voice sympathetic but matter-of-fact. "They didn't like the joke. It was uncomfortable." Maya's breath caught. She hadn't imagined it. Ethan's words had cut deeper than she had realized, and now it was clear. It had affected everyone who'd heard it. For so long, Maya had told herself it was a misstep, that it was just one bad moment. But now she knew the truth. It wasn't just a slip. It was intentional. A carefully calculated act to publicly diminish her in front of their family and friends. The thought stung deeper than she cared to admit. Gus had been quiet throughout all of this. He'd supported her without trying to control her emotions, without pushing her to take action before she was ready. He hadn't celebrated her pain, as he put it, but he had been steady, offering a hand without ever forcing it. As she read the email, she felt a deep sense of gratitude toward him. He had been right. This was about more than just her feelings. It was about truth. And truth was what she needed to face now. As the days passed, things escalated quickly. Victor's HR team opened an internal investigation into Ethan's project, and Ethan's role was suspended pending the outcome. It was swift, almost clinical, and for a moment, Maya wondered if it was enough. She had always imagined Ethan's downfall would be more dramatic, more satisfying, but the reality was quiet, a slow unraveling that felt hollow. Then came Ethan's final attempt, a message to Maya, one last desperate plea for control. "I know we've had our differences," it began, "but if you help me now, I'll show you respect. We can make this right. Just come back to me." Maya knew what he was doing. He was offering her respect in exchange for her loyalty, for her silence. But Gus wasn't having it. He looked at the message, his face calm, and simply said, "Respect isn't a trade. It's a habit you didn't build." Maya felt a chill run through her as Gus's words sank in. Ethan's offer wasn't about rebuilding trust, it was about buying it, and that was something Maya couldn't accept. The truth was simple. Ethan had never respected her. He had manipulated her, made her feel small, and used her connection to Gus to further his own agenda. As Ethan's true nature became clearer, Maya felt the weight of her years with him. She had spent so much time making excuses for him, for his behavior, his moods. But now, the fog was lifting, and she was finally seeing him for who he really was. She looked at Gus, her heart aching. "I think I married a stranger," she whispered, the weight of those words settling in her chest. The silence between them was heavy with the truth. Ethan's mask had slipped, and Maya was finally free to see the man beneath. But where would she go from here? The decision ahead wasn't clear, but it was hers to make. And with that, she knew there was no going back. When Maya stepped into Lila's office, she knew the next step would change everything. Lila's presence was calm, but there was a quiet intensity in her eyes as she slid a thick file across the desk. "We're moving forward with the annulment," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "We'll file for fraud and coercion. Ethan's actions can be framed as a deliberate misuse of trust, and with your statements, we can show that this wasn't just a marriage gone wrong. It's a pattern of manipulation." Maya's stomach clenched. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and it felt like the floor had fallen out from under her. She had known Ethan had used her, but to hear it laid out like this made everything feel more real, more inescapable. The legal terms fraud, coercion, felt like foreign concepts, like a heavy language she had never wanted to speak. But at the same time, it was the first real step toward breaking free, the first chance to end the cycle he had trapped her in. "This won't be quick," Lila continued, her voice even. "But with the fraud angle, it'll expedite things. Ethan doesn't have the legal ground he thinks he does. Once we file for annulment, we'll have the leverage to push for more." Maya nodded slowly, trying to breathe through the tightness in her chest. Going public with everything exposing the manipulation, the lies, the control felt like a weight she hadn't fully prepared for. But she had already lived with the consequences of hiding the truth, of pretending things would improve on their own. She couldn't hide anymore. It was time to stop pretending, to stop letting him dictate the story. In the following days, Maya took the first steps toward reclaiming her life. She opened her own bank account, something she had never done during her marriage. She redirected her payroll, making sure she had control over her finances for the first time in years. It felt like a small victory, a hard-earned shred of independence. But the power of that simple action was undeniable. For the first time in years, Maya had control over her life, over her future. Gus was with her every step of the way, supporting her without pushing, letting her make the decisions she needed to make. He helped her find a therapist who specialized in coercive control. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly, the concern in his voice a steady comfort. Maya wasn't sure she was ready for therapy yet, but she knew it was necessary. There was so much damage to undo, and healing wasn't going to happen overnight. But just when she thought she was gaining some ground, Ethan retaliated. His social media post appeared out of nowhere, passive-aggressive and loaded with blame. "Betrayal is a hard pill to swallow, but I'll survive. People have a way of showing their true colors. Watch out for gold diggers who can't see what's in front of them." Maya's breath caught in her throat. Ethan's words were designed to hurt, to twist the situation into something that fit his narrative. She showed the post to Gus, whose response was calm, unwavering. "Let him say whatever he wants. The truth will come out in the end, and you don't have to play his game anymore. Maya sat back, feeling both anger and exhaustion flood her. Ethan was trying to rewrite the story again, making her the villain, but she wasn't going to stay silent this time. She wasn't going to let him manipulate the narrative anymore. The next day, Diane and Maya went to the marital apartment to pack her things. Diane had arranged for a civil standby, ensuring that things stayed calm, that Ethan wouldn't escalate the situation. The process was emotionally draining, seeing the life she had once built with Ethan now shattered. Maya packed quickly, avoiding looking back, but the weight of it all pressed down on her. This wasn't just clothes. This was her life, packed up in boxes. As they finished, Maya found something hidden in a drawer, a folder labeled Kindle Leverage. Her hand shook as she pulled it out. Inside, there were emails, notes, documents, all evidence that Ethan had been using her father's influence to further his own career. The realization hit like a blow. Ethan had never cared for her. He had only used her as a stepping stone to climb higher. Her breath caught in her throat. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was calculated, cold, and methodical. She stood there, holding the folder in her hands, staring at the man she had trusted for years. The man she had married was nothing more than a liar and a manipulator. Now, she had the power to take everything back. But what would be left when it was all over? Would she ever be the same? Maya closed the folder, her heart racing. This was just the beginning. The road ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain, there was no going back. Maya's heart raced as she opened the folder, her fingers trembling. The label Kindle Leverage sent a shiver down her spine. Inside, the first page was a schedule, Gus's trustee schedule, meticulously detailed, along with a list of contacts and notes about pressuring votes. Maya's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about a marriage falling apart. This was about something far deeper, something darker. Ethan had used her family to build his empire. But it was the draft email that really struck her. From Ethan to Victor, it read, "After the wedding, Gus will cooperate. He's always been good at keeping up appearances." Maya's breath caught in her throat. Ethan had never married her for love. He had married her for access to Gus, to her family, to the influence they held. The realization hit her like ice water. She had been a pawn in his game all along, a means to an end. Maya had never truly mattered to Ethan. She was just a bridge to his next big deal, a piece of leverage to advance his career. Her mind spun. How had she been so blind? Ethan had used her, manipulated her feelings, and for what? Power. Control. The truth was now laid out in front of her, cold and undeniable. Gus walked into the room, his eyes flicking to the folder in her hands. He hadn't seen it yet, but he knew. The silence between them was thick, full of unspoken understanding. Maya felt the weight of his grief without him saying a word. He hadn't just failed to protect her, he had trusted Ethan, too. But this wasn't just about the betrayal of her trust anymore. It was about realizing how deeply Ethan had woven his manipulations into their lives. "Maya," Gus finally said, his voice rough. "I'm sorry. I didn't see it." Maya shook her head, unable to speak at first. The pain was too fresh, too raw, but she had to confront it. "He didn't just want me," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and grief. "He wanted access. He used me to get to you." Gus took a slow breath, the weight of his own realization settling in. "I should have seen it, Maya. I should have protected you better." She looked up at him, the depth of his regret cutting through her. He had always been her protector, but this had been beyond him. This wasn't about mistakes made in the moment. This was about years of manipulation, of using people as stepping stones. Lila had already taken the folder and begun documenting everything. She was careful, precise, making sure to secure every piece of evidence. "Chain of custody," she had said. It was her legal approach to ensure that nothing would be dismissed, that nothing would be overlooked. Victor's response was more telling than anything. He had gone completely silent, the usual bravado gone from his tone. Maya realized that the legal pressure was finally catching up to him. He was afraid, and for the first time, Ethan's web of lies seemed to be unraveling. Maya's eyes scanned the folder one more time. It was clear now this wasn't just about leaving Ethan. It was about exposing him. Ethan had manipulated her, but now the power had shifted. "I'm not just going to leave him," Maya said, her voice low but resolute. "I'm going to expose him for who he really is." Gus looked at her, his face filled with a quiet understanding. "I'll support you, no matter what." Maya took a deep breath. She had always been the one trying to make everything work, trying to fix things. But now, it was her turn to fight, to expose the truth. The path ahead wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let Ethan get away with this. She wasn't just going to walk away. She was going to make sure everyone knew exactly who Ethan was. And with that realization, she stood taller. There was no turning back now. Ethan sat across from the HR representative, his usual calm demeanor in place. But there was a subtle edge to his smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was used to spinning stories, to making everything look like someone else's fault. This interview would be no different, he thought. The company had already made up its mind, and all he had to do was talk his way out of it. "Mr. Price, we've reviewed the findings," the HR representative began, her voice measured but firm. "We need to hear your side of the story regarding the safety report falsifications." Ethan nodded, his lips curling into that familiar, confident grin. Of course, it was a misunderstanding, really. The team was under pressure. The deadlines were tight. "I didn't have all the facts at the time, but I certainly didn't authorize anything illegal. If anything, it's a mistake, a series of unfortunate events." He lied smoothly, his voice oozing reassurance. He spoke of office politics, of missed deadlines, and of vague miscommunications. He blamed the junior staff, pointed fingers at others, and made it clear that he was simply trying to keep everything running smoothly. But the HR rep didn't seem convinced. She shuffled the papers in front of her, her face hardening. "Mr. Price, we found something else. We've come across a folder containing documents and emails related to your dealings with Maya Kendall's father. These documents suggest more than just a simple miscommunication." Ethan froze for a split second, the lie beginning to unravel, but then he quickly regained his composure. "That folder," he started, but the HR rep slid the folder in front of him, and Ethan's expression shifted as he saw the documents Maya had uncovered. The folder was labeled Kendall Leverage, and inside it were screenshots of emails, notes, and contacts related to Gus's influence, detailing how Ethan had planned to leverage his relationship with Maya for professional gain. His face paled as he skimmed through the documents, his mind racing to find a way out. But it was too late. The lies were already crumbling. Each lie he told only forced him to dig a deeper hole. This is just a misunderstanding." Ethan tried again, his voice less confident. Gus was always involved in big decisions. It was never meant to be anything more than that. But the more he spoke, the more the truth emerged. The more he tried to cover his tracks, the more obvious it became that he had manipulated everyone around him, his colleagues, his fiancé, even the company that had given him his position. The HR representative was quiet for a moment, then straightened in her chair. "Victor Hargrove has distanced himself from you, Mr. Price. The firm is implementing compliance reforms, and your actions are directly tied to these violations. We've already referred the matter to the proper authorities." Ethan's eyes widened, but there was no anger, just panic. He opened his mouth, about to protest, but his voice caught in his throat. His professional life, his carefully constructed image, was unraveling before him. Victor's public distancing from Ethan felt like the final blow. Ethan's smug smile faltered completely. His hands shook slightly, but he quickly covered it with a laugh. "This is ridiculous. It's all a setup. Gus is the one who—" "Enough, Ethan," the HR representative cut him off. "We've made our decision. You're terminated, effective immediately." The words landed like a punch. Ethan's face flushed with fury, and before he could stop himself, he erupted. "Gus!" he shouted. "That nobody got lucky. He's just some old man who got a job because of his connections. I worked for everything I have, and he's just a fool." Maya, standing outside the office door, could hear every word. Her heart pounded as she listened to Ethan unravel, to hear him lash out in desperation. She had always known that Ethan wasn't the man she thought he was. But hearing him like this, the venom in his voice, the way he twisted the truth, was still a shock. Inside the room, Gus, who had silently waited for this moment, asked Ethan the one question that cut through the tension. "Do you hear yourself?" Ethan stood there, speechless, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. Maya leaned against the wall, her breath shallow. She felt relief. Finally, after everything he had put her through, Ethan was being held accountable. But even as the anger washed over her, she couldn't deny the heartbreak. She had loved him once, trusted him. The man she had married, he was gone, and in his place was someone far worse. Her phone buzzed, but Maya didn't look at it. She knew what came next. This was the beginning of the end, but the question remained, how much of herself had she lost along the way? Would she ever truly recover from the damage Ethan had caused? The story wasn't over. The reckoning had only just begun. Maya stood by the window of her new apartment, staring out at the quiet streets below. It was a small place, but it was hers. And that small fact felt monumental. The silence was strange at first, a stark contrast to the constant tension of her life with Ethan. But now, she found herself craving it. The stillness gave her space to think, to breathe, and to begin the slow process of rebuilding. The mornings were the hardest. Without the noise of Ethan's demands, the emptiness of the space felt louder than she anticipated. But over time, she fell into a routine, waking up to the smell of coffee brewing, reading for an hour, and taking long walks in the evening. These small rituals, once forgotten, slowly pieced her back together, bit by bit. Gus, meanwhile, had returned to his familiar life. He spent his days volunteering at the union hall, mentoring younger workers, and continuing his commitment to the values he had lived by for decades. It wasn't much, but it was a steady, dependable life, a stark contrast to the storm of chaos and manipulation he had witnessed. Gus didn't talk much about the past, but Maya knew he had done everything in his power to protect her. Every now and then, he'd check in on her, quietly ensuring she was finding her balance, not rushing her healing. She appreciated his steady presence. He wasn't asking her to move on, but to heal in her own time. Reverend Simmons had reached out to Maya a few times, offering his support without pushing her. He didn't offer grand speeches or try to tie everything up neatly with spiritual platitudes. Instead, he quietly checked in, giving Maya the space to come to terms with her past on her own. He said nothing about forgiveness or redemption. He just wanted to make sure she had the space to heal. And Maya did heal, in her own way. Slowly, she started to speak more openly about what had happened, naming the humiliation and control Ethan had exerted over her. For so long, she had been too ashamed to say it aloud. The reality of the situation was painful, but acknowledging it gave her a sense of control that she hadn't had in years. It was the beginning of truly seeing herself again, outside of Ethan's manipulation. Meanwhile, Lila had been quietly finalizing the legal details. Protective orders were in place, the divorce was official, and the legal battles were winding down. It wasn't the victory Maya had imagined. It was quiet, almost anticlimactic, but it was final. Ethan had no more hold over her. She didn't need to keep fighting to be free. Then a short, terse message came from Victor. "You were right about him." It was all he said, nothing more. No apology, no acknowledgement of the damage Ethan had caused. But for a moment, Maya allowed herself to feel vindicated. It wasn't much, but it was something. She had known the truth all along, and now others were starting to see it too. Gus wasn't interested in celebrating that victory. When she told him about the message, he simply nodded. "That doesn't matter, Maya," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "What matters is that you're moving on. You're not letting him define you anymore." Maya sat quietly, the weight of his words sinking in. The victory she thought she'd wanted, Ethan's public humiliation, the proof that he was the villain, didn't matter anymore. What mattered was her own peace, her own future. She looked out at the city, the lights flickering in the distance. It was still a bit overwhelming, the quiet of it all, but it was hers to claim. The damage wasn't going to disappear overnight, and she knew there would be tough days ahead. But one thing had changed. For the first time in years, she felt like she was reclaiming herself. And with that quiet realization, she understood it wasn't about getting revenge or proving Ethan wrong. It was about finding her way back to herself. And with every small step, she was getting closer. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Maya was ready to walk it. Maya sat beside Gus, her hands twisting in her lap, unsure of how to begin. The guilt weighed heavy on her, but she couldn't ignore the truth anymore. "Dad," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I should have defended you at the wedding. I should have stood up for you when Ethan humiliated you." Gus didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted out the window, the calm of his posture making it clear that he wasn't angry. But the sorrow was there beneath the calm, hidden but real. After a moment, he turned to her, his expression soft but firm. "Maya, you don't need to apologize. I don't need defending. I need you safe. That's all I've ever wanted for you." Maya's heart clenched. She wanted to say more, wanted to explain how much the weight of that moment had crushed her. But Gus's words, gentle as they were, made it clear that he understood. She hadn't been able to protect him, but she was still his daughter, and he didn't need her to fight his battles. He needed her to be free. Gus leaned in, his tone deepening. "You need to understand something, though. If you're going to move forward, there can't be any reconciliation with Ethan without accountability and therapy. He doesn't get to waltz back into your life without facing what he did." Maya stared at him, a wave of realization washing over her. She hadn't been ready to face the full scope of what Ethan had done, how he had used her, manipulated her emotions, all to climb his way up. Gus wasn't just giving her advice. He was setting a boundary, one that would ensure she didn't fall into the same trap again. "I don't want you to go back to him," Gus said. "Not unless he can prove he's willing to change. For you. For what he did to you." Maya nodded slowly, taking it all in. There was no easy way to fix this. The damage was done. And though she still loved him, Ethan's actions had shattered the trust between them. It wasn't just the toast. It was everything. The lies, the manipulation, the power plays. And then, just as Maya was absorbing all of it, the doorbell rang. She froze, knowing exactly who was standing on the other side. "Ethan." Gus didn't hesitate as he rose from the chair and moved toward the door, his presence as unyielding as ever. Ethan was there, waiting with a calculated smile, his charm still in place despite the chaos that had unraveled around him. But this time, the mask didn't fool Maya. "Maya," Ethan began, his voice smooth, his words like honey. "Let's start over. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. You and me, we can go back to what we had. Just give me a chance, please." Maya didn't flinch. She felt no pull toward him, only a deep, steady resolve. "No, Ethan," she said, her voice clear. "I'm not going back. Not after everything you did. The toast, the lies, the folder. I'm done." Ethan's face twisted in disbelief, his charm faltering for the first time. His lips parted, but before he could speak, Diane stepped forward, her stance unwavering, her words a finality. "Maya's made her choice. You're not welcome here." Maya watched as Ethan's expression soured, the confidence in his eyes replaced with anger and confusion. He turned, walking away without another word, the door slamming behind him. The silence that followed was profound. Maya felt a sense of finality settle over her. This was it. Ethan was gone. But as she stood there, her heart still heavy, the question lingered. Had she truly closed the door on him? Or was there something deeper that still needed to be healed? She glanced at Gus, who stood beside her, steady and resolute. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe again. The battle wasn't over, but it had just taken its first step forward. Maya set the table in her new apartment, carefully placing mismatched plates and glasses. The room felt quiet, but in a peaceful way. Tonight, she was hosting a small dinner for Gus and Diane, nothing fancy. Just a simple meal to mark a shift in her life. The scent of garlic and basil filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of her apartment. It felt like the first true home she'd had in years. When Gus and Diane arrived, they greeted her with warmth, Diane wrapping her in a tight hug, Gus offering a reassuring nod. There were no pretenses between them anymore, just an understanding that they were all trying to heal in their own ways. Dinner passed easily. The three of them talking about small things, how Gus was mentoring younger workers at the union hall, how Diane had started a new project at work. But every now and then, Maya caught herself watching Gus, noticing how much he had always cared for her, even when she couldn't see it. Finally, after a quiet pause, Maya put down her fork, looking at Gus. "I've been thinking about what success means," she began softly. "For so long, I thought it was about appearances, how others saw me, how I looked in Ethan's world. But now, I'm redefining it. Success isn't about status or what people think of you. It's about peace, about feeling whole, not shattered." Gus looked at her, his gaze steady. That's real success, Maya. Maya nodded, her eyes tracing the table. It's taken me a while to get here. But peace. Peace feels more important than anything else now. Gus sighed deeply, his gaze turning inward for a moment. The word loser. It still stings, he said quietly. Not because of my pride, but because of the disrespect behind it. Ethan's words were never just about you, Maya. He was trying to tear us down to make himself feel taller. Maya felt a pang in her chest. She knew it had hurt her father deeply, but hearing him say it out loud, so plainly, made the reality even more raw. I never saw it that way, she admitted, the weight of everything they'd been through settling on her. But I get it now. He wasn't just being cruel. He was hiding behind those jokes. Gus nodded, his expression softening. The hardest part is knowing you were never just someone to him. You were a stepping stone. Maya looked down at the table, trying to process it all. Her relationship with Ethan had always been tangled, but now it was becoming clearer. Ethan's words had always masked his true intentions. Diane, who had been quietly listening, reached for a small package she'd brought. She handed it to Maya with a gentle smile. "This is for you," Diane said. Maya opened it to find an old family photo album. She felt the tears welling up before she even flipped it open. The photos were a reminder of the family she had, the one that had never left her, even when everything else felt broken. She ran her fingers over the pictures, memories of simpler times, before the manipulation, before the hurt. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Gus stood, offering his hand to her. "Let's take a walk by the water, like we used to. No rush, no pressure." Maya smiled softly, taking his hand. The cool air of the evening embraced them as they walked along the water's edge, the sound of the waves soothing her racing thoughts. Finally, after a few moments, Maya spoke quietly, her words carrying the weight of her resolve. "I won't let anyone shrink my family to make themselves feel taller. Not anymore. I've learned that now." Gus glanced at her, his face filled with quiet pride. "I'm proud of you, Maya, more than you know." As they walked together, the path ahead still uncertain, Maya knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter. She was taking back control, step by step, and nothing would stop her from defining her worth on her own terms. The event was held at the same venue where it had all started, the place where Ethan had humiliated him. Gus stood at the entrance, his eyes scanning the familiar yet different surroundings. The crowd was a mix of new faces, familiar faces, and those who had once nodded at him with polite indifference, now giving him subtle nods of acknowledgement. The energy in the room was different this time. It wasn't a place where power dynamics ruled. There was no undercurrent of judgment, no polished facade designed to hide insecurity. It was raw, real, and yet there was a warmth, an unspoken camaraderie among the attendees. People weren't looking over their shoulders, measuring their worth against others. Instead, there was an air of respect, a respect that had always been earned, not bought. Gus had long since stopped caring about public recognition. He didn't need the spotlight. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone, especially not to the people who had belittled him when Ethan had been at his side. But there was something about this moment, this event, that made him feel the weight of his quiet reputation. As he moved through the crowd, he was greeted with handshakes, nods, and a genuine warmth that felt different from the empty gestures he used to get. It was as if his presence mattered now not because of his associations, but because of who he was, his quiet strength, his integrity, his refusal to let the world dictate his value. Those were the things people remembered. When Maya arrived, Gus couldn't help but notice the change in her. She was smiling, truly smiling, without that tightness around her eyes, without the lingering shadow of shame. She wasn't the girl who had cowered under Ethan's words anymore. She was standing tall, confident, free. The change in her was undeniable, and it made something inside Gus soften, the pride he felt for her building like a quiet wave. As Maya joined him in the crowd, Gus glanced across the street and saw Ethan standing there, looking smaller without his usual entourage. Without the audience, the man who had once carried himself with arrogance seemed diminished. His confident posture faltered, the swagger that had once filled every room now absent. He was still trying to keep up appearances, but the energy around him was different. There was no one left to admire him, no one left to feed his ego. Gus didn't say anything, but Maya noticed him looking. She followed his gaze, and for a second, Gus saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. But there was no anger, no bitterness. Maya's face remained calm, serene even, as she simply kept walking forward, her smile never wavering. The scene struck Gus with a force that caught him off guard. Maya had truly let go. She was no longer tethered to Ethan's manipulation. And in that moment, it was clear to Gus that everything had changed not just for Maya, but for him, too. Recognition, Gus realized, wasn't about status. It wasn't about the people who cheered you on when things were going well, when you had all the right connections. No, recognition came from the life you built when no one was watching. It came from the quiet moments, the hard work, the sacrifices, the strength to keep going, even when it felt like the world was against you. It was about the integrity you carried in the darkest moments, long before anyone could see the results. Gus squeezed Maya's shoulder as they continued walking. She glanced up at him, her eyes bright, her smile still steady. Gus thought to himself, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle in. He called me unemployed, yet everyone who matters already knew my name. For the first time in a long while, Gus didn't feel the sting of those words. Instead, he felt something deeper. It wasn't about proving people wrong or seeking validation anymore. It was about knowing, without a doubt, that the life he had built had meaning, that the people who mattered, Maya, Diane, the people who had supported him through it all, knew who he truly was. And as they walked forward together, Gus knew that recognition, real recognition, came not from status or fame, but from the life you created when nobody was watching. And that was enough.